was, his poison apple tech, which allows him to exert an opponent, or if they are a princess, then they get banished. And there's quite a few princesses in the Ruby Sapphire deck that Zero is playing. Do you think that Apple is going to make or break this matchup, or do you think that there are ways that Zero can move around it and find his way to victory?
Honestly, I'm not too sure. I think well, certainly it seems like the sword is probably not going to be too well, I guess no, I stand corrected. We have the Maleficence and the Scars for the swords. But then yeah, just so many princesses in Zero's deck. See, the one thing I'm thinking about is how concerned is Zero with his characters being removed? Because if he's not super concerned about his characters being removed and mostly focuses on removing Lao's engine, which is gonna be his Maurice's, honestly, I could see it going the match going either way. It might just end up being who has more gas or who has more cards at the end. And I think the players are ready to start. I will just double check with them and make sure they can start whenever they are ready. And yeah.
I'm trying to pay attention to see who might have won the roll. Whoever that last roll was had a 10, I think.
Cool. All right. So let's see how they play out the mulligans. I'll take a look on Zero's side. So pretty typical. He wants to mulligan away all of his high cost cards. Keep the ramp. Pretty normal for a control kind of player.
Yeah, what do you think the ramp on this matchup looks like for each player? Because both are running some Gramatalas. I believe both are running some Mickey Mouse detectives. Are you kind of ignoring the opponent and what they're doing and just like throwing your stuff down? Are you trying to delay them in any way? I would imagine you're just trying to get to your high ink count as fast as possible and be some of the first people playing stuff onto the board.
Yeah, I can imagine both players are going to get to high ink pretty soon, and it's going to end up who can have more cards, who ends up having more card draw, because both players have really situational card draw in these decks. So
Yeah, we see quite the lacking hand in characters, at least for I believe that's Lao below us. He has basically full items and then a Dragonfire, a one jump ahead, and a Be Prepared. Um, whereas Zero has quite a few characters that he's going to be able to play. It looks like he'll be able to play the Grammatala on turn 2, possibly the Mickey on turn 3, and then he has another Mickey if he wants to play it. So I'll be really interested to see if Lao can keep up with as fast as Zero is going to be able to start inking stuff. One thing that I like to mention are those Fishbone Quill cards. I think they're very underrated in the sense of they just can really put put ink into your deck very quickly. And if he can get one of those out on board, at that point, it kind of stops mattering if he starts drawing uninkable cards or dead cards in his hand because he'll be able to ink basically 2 cards every turn, and that can happen very quickly.
yeah, though honestly right now I'm a little bit concerned for Lao because I think what his deck wants to do is draw a bunch of those items a bit later on in the game. But right now his hand is just chock full of items and not too many relevant characters that he can play. So I think just from the get-go, the draw isn't quite on his side. Let's see if he can like kind of ramp up fast enough to get to his control elements in order to kind of just have some relevant cards to play because right now Zero seems to have a pretty easy turn 3 Mickeys. He has a bunch of Mickeys to really quickly ramp up there. So
Yeah, even just the pressure of having a bunch of those Mickeys on board and the Grandma Talas on board without anything on the other side questing for every turn,
Hmm.
that's just one, two, maybe three lore a turn, but like that starts adding up really quickly. And in a control matchup like this, where games are lasting kind of long, the closer and closer that Zero inches towards 20 gets really dangerous, especially because Zero is running a couple heroic outlaws. And so not only is he getting closer and closer to 20 lore, but he might have the ability to shift onto a heroic outlaw and swing for lore. But also he can take lore away from Lao. So if Lao can't move quick enough, then he might just get outpaced by that alone. He does have the Tamatoa not in his hand, but he does have the Tamatoa, and we've seen before how quickly Tamatoa can gain lore all in one turn. So he
Yeah.
does draw the Maurice, which is good to see, but he has quite the ways to go before he can actually get Maurice on board.
Yeah, and that's why I zoomed in, highlighted his cards. That Maurice was definitely a good draw, though. Now I wonder if he wants to try to play out the fishbone just to try to get to that Maurice faster.
That's
Um,
exactly what I'm thinking here.
yeah.
You just play out the fishbone, throw some extra stuff in your ink, get up to would it be 4 or 5 ink this turn? I
Yeah.
don't remember if he inked already.
And I would say this is a bane of the control player, which is having some high cost cards. Like you kind of don't want to really ink a bunch of them, right? You really don't want to ink that Be Prepared. You don't want to ink that Hades. You don't want to ink your items with Maurice. Try so eventually you just have to pick something. You have to ink, right? So
You can see Lau playing really slow. He's having a really hard time thinking about what he wants to put into his inkwell. I imagine
mhm.
for the reasons you just mentioned.
Yo.
At least with that Maurice, hopefully he can get some card draw. One of the things that I'm concerned about for Lau is because he's playing in a pseudo mirror with the Ruby Sapphire. Ruby Sapphire is full of hard removal between the Let It Goes, the Hades, the Maleficents, the Dragonfires. So if it's not very likely that a Maurice sticks on board for very long. And
Mm.
I believe that's the only draw engine that he has in his deck. And so if, like mentioned before, if Lau gets the Maurices out and he just can't get them to stick and can't draw enough cards and get into the stuff that he needs to, he
Hmm.
might have a really difficult time keeping up with Zero, especially with this early pressure and early lead that Zero is putting on.
Yup, yup. A lot of times, like, Lao really probably wants to play the Maurice and play some items, right? You're probably not gonna be able to quest with the Maurice to reduce the cost of your items. But if you can grab some cheap items, you can at least get some value out of the Maurice before opponent uses a removal on it. Um, on the other hand, I think uh, we can kind of clearly see from this control versus control matchup that like board presence doesn't mean too much since next turn there's a Be Prepared ready just to wipe out all of the Mickeys and the Grand Matala. So I mean sure Zero is probably going to get to 6 lore, but 6 is a long way to go to 20. So I would say we're definitely kind of seeing soon the second stage of the game, which is when the board has been pretty stabilized. Both players have more than 7 ink. Now it just becomes a matter of how do you navigate that minefield of playing against another control player. So
Yeah, that's going to be the mind games being played during this game is, when do you play what cards? Because there's just an unbelievable amount of removal in both of these players' decks, and you don't want to throw out your really strong cards just to get hit with a Dragonfire or a Hades or a Be Prepared even. And so it's going to take a lot of mental fortitude and a lot of thinking from both sides to figure out exactly how they want to play things out, guessing what their opponent's holding in hand, trying to figure out what the opponent's threats are, because I don't even know if Lau knows what threats
oh
Zero is
yeah.
running in his deck.
Yeah, I bet you Lao was hoping for any sort of inkable. That Mickey was not probably what he was hoping for. He's probably going to end up playing out the Mickey and giving a Zero one extra questing turn. But he probably really doesn't want to ink that Maurice in order to play the Be Prepared.
Yeah, I don't really think he can ink the Maurice right now. He
Yeah.
can use the Fishbone Quill if he wants to get rid of another uninkable
Oh,
card.
that's actually
He
a
could
great
get
point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he could get rid of the Mickey and
Yep.
then just use Be Prepared, wipe the board, and start building all over again.
Yep. I don't play enough of the Fishbone Quill to get used to it, but that is exactly correct. Though, one other kind of consideration there is a Mickey technically is a card draw because when you play out the Mickey, you get a card into your ink. So this way, it reduces opponent from uh being able to quest to 10 next turn. But I wonder if uh that's relevant in this matchup, or if even kind of playing out the Mickey to grab an extra ink might have potentially been better. But I guess it's the same either way because the Be Prepared is going to wipe out your own Mickey. So yeah. Oh.
Yeah, it could
That's yeah.
definitely make the difference in the long run. Something that I noticed watching Lao play before is he inks a lot,
Mm,
mainly because he needs to be able to play out those Maurices and play out those items. And
mm,
especially in this deck, as talked about before, knowing that you're going to run into removal, having not seen much removal so far from Zero because you haven't played much to be removed. You need to be able to play out a lot of stuff the turn that Maurice comes onto the board. And we're going to see that he immediately throws the Hades down, getting rid of that Aladdin. He
mhm.
said, hey, there's not any lore to steal, but that 2 free lore every turn, you don't want him getting any closer to 20 than you have to.
Yo, see, I wonder now is if uh Zero plays out the Be Prepared instead of his Hades. In general, I find that in a kind of control versus control matchup, once you stabilize, the Be Prepareds kind of act as a little bit of a double-edged sword because it also removes one of your any cards you have on your field as well. So a lot of times it just ends up being a dead card in your hand that you don't really want to play. But nope, we see that he just plays essentially the same play, Hades, to bounce their Hades into the Inkwell. And we do see it's probably gonna be very similar plays throughout. Like you play a Maleficent, I Dragonfire it. You play the Aladdin or Let It Go on my creatures, I Dragonfire your creatures. So it's definitely gonna be a while before we might very well come to kind of top deck mode where both players just use up all of their resources in hand and just whoever gets the better top decks may end up winning.
That's a really good point, especially about the Be Prepared stuff, because looking at both deck lists, I'm noticing that Zero runs way more units than Lao is playing at the moment. And
Mhm.
so the more units that he's playing out on board, obviously the worse and worse that Be Prepared gets. So using it early when it's not going to affect anything on your side of the board definitely seems beneficial for him.
The other thing to keep in mind with Be Prepared though is if we're coming from the perspective of both players, if they don't know the complete deck list of your opponent, you might want to save Be Prepared in case of ward creatures, right? So we can see Zero running Auroras and stuff, right? But he if he doesn't know that Lao isn't running kind of any ward creatures, then really valid play is saving those Be Prepared in case you come up against kind of those creatures that you can't easily deal with spot removal. I just have that really fresh in my mind because in control matchups I play a lot against Emerald and they have that Cusco, which is super difficult to deal with unless you have Be Prepared. So it's a really great tech against those ward creatures. So that might be a reason why Zero is saving those in hand.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ward is Definitely a problem if you only have the Dragonfires and the Maleficents and the Let It Goes. So I can definitely see why they would be holding a Be Prepared. Right now, though, it's really just looking like a grind fest. Like they
Yeah.
just keep playing stuff on board. It immediately gets removed. The next person plays something that gets removed again. Jay, you play a lot more control than I do.
Yes.
As a
This.
control player,
Mhm.
what's the game plan right now? Like for each side, what are you thinking about? What are you trying to do?
So in a controls slugfest, card draw is king, and so I think both players are probably trying to figure out ways to capitalize on their limited ways of getting card draw. So Zero is probably really aiming to find those Robin Hoods, that can help him, whereas Lao is probably really trying to figure out how to make the best use of the Maurices. So right now, Lao is really looking at optimal Maurice, hopefully enough ink to play Maurice in both of his items. But I think he's still a little bit of ways to go. But if he can get more card draw, or whichever player gets more card draw, is going to be slightly favored. So I think, yeah, this is something I've seen a lot happen. Where it just ends up being both players kind of react to what their opponent does. Both players don't really have a great way to generate lore. And so it just ends up being who can, sadly, it might end up coming to who ends up decking out the other player first. But as it stands, I think there's still a lot of kind of play left, for both players. One thing I mentioned, kind of taking a look at Zero's hand, is again in that control versus control matchup, that Maui is not doing the most work. He is a card that sure you can play, but very likely Lao is just totally okay with ignoring that Maui, period, because it can't generate lore. And if Lao has a Be Prepared in his hand, yeah, so Lao is capitalizing on that card drop. Oh, he also has Robin Hood, so great. So definitely playing that out, and being able to kind of hopefully just get a little bit more value than the opponent.
Yeah, that Maui is he definitely is helpful in many other matchups, but that zero lore, obviously having reckless, it doesn't make sense for him to have much lore. Yeah, is kind of means nothing when it's on zero side of the board because he can sit there, but with all of the removal, it's very easy for Lao or Zero to remove a Maui if they feel like questing.
Yeah.
And I feel like those Robin Hoods coming down at the right time is going to be really, really important for this matchup too, because like you said, draw is king. And there are times where I think each player is just like drawing cards and then passing, right? Like they don't want to do anything. There's not a lot that they want to, they don't want to make themselves vulnerable to the stuff that they know the other player is holding or might be holding. And so the little bit of lore that they can squeeze in every now and then, I think is going to add up really quickly. So even getting stuff like 2 lore from Robin Hood right now, knowing that the Maui might slam into it, or in this case, he's going to play Hades and just throw Maui into the inkwell. Like being able to grab that 2 lore, I feel like it's going to be one of those turtle and the rabbit kind of things where like the slowest, it's going to be a really slow race, but somebody's going to make it to the end eventually.
Yep. This is a key. This is a great opportunity for a Be Prepared to come down. Just whenever you can in a control matchup, there's two big kind of cards. It's 2 for 1. Simple math there, right? So it might also just end up. See, I think one of the reasons why the control versus control matchup ends up being so slow is because Be Prepared is just such a good card that you don't want to run more than necessary into it. And so uh, if you know that like your opponent might be having a Be Prepared, if you put like 2 or more characters onto the board, that's just giving your opponent card advantage there. And so because of that fear, it really leads to kind of just slow, kind of methodical play styles. But yeah, we see now Lao just capitalizing on those low cost items. And getting two card draws out of the Maurice. One thing to note here, that Maurice is a grade 8 threat, right? So absolutely, there's no question about it. Zero should remove it one way or another. Um, because I would say if Lao was able to get both of the Maurices out, that's just way too much card draw for his sort of deck there.
Yeah, you certainly can't let any one of these stick on the board for any longer than one turn, the turn that it's played. It makes me think, though, with the more Maurices that he's playing and capitalizing on these items, one thing that Be Prepared doesn't get rid of is the items. So I know that Apple and Sword, those are a little bit more expensive, but eventually, as Lau keeps putting ink into his inkwell, do we think that those items are going to end up like making or breaking this game? Because we know that Zero's playing things like Maleficent Monstrous Dragon, who's a villain. He's playing Hades, who's a villain. And those extra items um, are just easy ways to get rid of those characters. But at the same time, I guess we have to think about the Tamatoa as well. But like realistically, does Lau think he's going to be able to get any value out of those Tamatoas when they come down too? Because one of the things about Lau's deck is because he's not running a ton of units, most of the units that hit the board are grade A threats, right? So are like is Lau just trying to exhaust Zero from all of his removal? Do you think the items are going to play a role at all in the
Yep.
success of this game, or is it just going to be purely to draw more cards?
Yeah, I absolutely think the items are going to play a role because if your opponent can remove it, and items stick around if you're not playing against steel, right? If your opponent can't remove items, they just end up being like a free kind of removal card on board that you can use whenever. So they'll definitely come in handy. I think the interesting part um is Lau going to be able to capitalize on using Tamatoa in order to return some of the items from his discard back onto the field? Because I think being able to do that would swing the game. So yeah, I would say Maurice and Tamatoa's if Lau can manage to get some good value out of them, can definitely change the game. Right now, I do like what Zero is doing. He's putting just enough pressure on the board so that it's a little bit awkward for Lao. Does he want to go with a Be Prepared, which picking out three characters is very tempting, right? Or does he want to kind of like use that Maui that he has in his hand in order to take out the dragon? Because he probably knows that in general that Maui probably isn't gonna be super useful other than to like kind of kill an exerted character. I don't know. I think it's a toss up. He could kind of go either way there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the Maui take, knowing that there likely aren't going to be many opportunities for you in this game to take out characters with Maui, especially a higher level threat like Maleficent with a big body, with a lot of strength and two lore is pretty notable. You know, why not throw down the Maui and get rid of the Maleficent? The problem is, like you said, he's putting on the pressure with those three characters, and we can see that Zero's already up to 8 lore, and this race isn't going very fast, but every time he gets a little bit closer to 20,
Yep.
Lau has to be a little bit concerned. He doesn't have a way to reduce that lore like Zero does.
Yep, I was just about to mention Lao does not run any Aladdins in his deck. Um okay, so he Lao chooses to ink the Maui and play out the Maurice to probably try to get more value out of his items. Um with the sword. Because the sword can also banish the
There it is.
Maleficent, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
We finally see the Tamatoa.
Okay.
Looks like he is going to use the sword to banish Maleficent. Knowing he has that Tamatoa in hand to bring it back, I definitely understand that decision.
Oh, and I forgot. Tamatoa is a act triggers when it comes into play as well as when it quests, right? So there's that little bit of added value from the Tamatoas regardless. That actually could make a difference here because I originally I thought Lao needed to quest with the Tamatoas, but nope, just playing it out means he can get back one of his items. But one thing to note here is two Maurices are gone, and there's no way for either player to recurse any of their characters from the discard. And so um, so we see a shift play from Zero. Zero is shifting the Aurora onto the small Auroras, giving all the rest of his characters ward, which might offer some protection against all of the removal. Unfortunately, um, that probably likely is going to end up being a be prepared turn because the best way to deal with ward is be prepared. But yeah, like I was saying, because both players don't have a way to recurse cards from their discard, it's really important to keep track of how many of threats that your opponent has used up, right? And so that's already two Maurices gone. If Lao loses the other two Maurices, he has to rely on the Tamatoas, and that's gonna be a difficult journey for him, definitely.
Yeah, he'll have to rely on the Tamatoas, and he only has Robin Hoods left in the deck to draw as well. But we already see he has a slightly bigger hand size than Zero does, so that may end up being a problem. That could change over the game.
Mhm.
Aurora is a very interesting character, I think. We see he's just going to take Aurora out with the apple.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those cards where she gives everyone else ward, which is a little bit of a speed bump. But there are many ways that, as we just saw, that it looks like Lao can take care of an Aurora. So I feel like she might be not as big of a threat, probably more so that with her two lore than anything, to be honest.
Yeah, and the one thing I noticed there is Lau wasn't able to get a card draw off of Robin Hood because both he and his opponent had the same number of cards in hand. So I don't know if that'll come back to mean a whole lot, but that's definitely notable when he played out that Robin Hood.
Yeah, and I believe I'll have to look at the list. Yeah, he does not run 4 copies of Robin Hood either. So every one of those is going to have to count.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've noticed for most of this game is Zero has done a pretty good job at just keeping pressure on the board. Having those Maleficents on board, we see the Grandma's Hala now. For the
Yeah.
most part, he seems to be the one that is demanding a reaction from Lao, which typically I think is a good thing in a control matchup. Like you're okay with being reactionary for a while, but in the control versus control matchup, it kind of looks like Zero's the one giving the beatdown right now, uh, gaining lots of lore, and Lao's having to use up a lot of his resources. Obviously, Lao has a bit more available to him in regards to resources because he has the items, along with all of the other action cards that he can use for removal. But yeah, this game is just slowly chugging along.
One thing I wanted to check, and I just looked it up. I was wondering if Lao has any Maleficents in his deck, and he both players are running 4 copies of Maleficents, and I don't believe I've seen any Maleficents from Lao. Maybe one earlier that I forgot about, but so those are definitely uh some good card draws later that will help him. So there's the third Maurice that we were talking about. I wonder if Lao is going to be a little bit more cautious, maybe hold on to that Maurice for as long as he can, and then try to like kind of even potentially play the Tamatoa before. Does Tamatoa return an item back onto the board or into your hand. If it's to your hand, then it'll just add some additional fuel for that Maurice to be able to draw cards, right?
Yep, it does bring it back from your discard to your hand, it looks like.
Got it. So I think that may be what might be going through Lao's mind right now. Of do I play the Tamatoa first, knowing opponent's likely just gonna have to spend some removal, getting rid of any removal for my Maurice, and then also using Tamatoa to get an item back into my hand, and then play Maurice and a couple of items to continue that card draw there. But in the meanwhile, we see that Be Prepared just to clear out that Maleficent threat. I think Be Prepared is the only removal, and we definitely sense that Zero might be kind of honing in on the fact that Lao may be running low on removal cards right now. And so I wonder if that's the reason why um, Zero is just constantly able to play out kind of these high lore threats to draw out any remaining removal and hopefully be able to just have something stick on the board.
That's what I was just thinking. I'm sure both players are counting specifically the Be Prepareds that are being played, because that's probably, although they can sometimes be dead cards because you don't want to remove stuff on your side of the board, they're very handy at getting rid of multiple things when your opponent has built up a board, when you're trying to get around ward. It's a very great value card, one of the strongest cards, if not the strongest card in Ruby. And when you see Zero play a card like Maleficent Uninvited, that's a 5 cost card, excuse me, with 3 lore, that demands a response. Maybe it's not a Be Prepared, but it's just one more thing that Lao is required to take care of, because every little bit of lore that Zero keeps getting, he's getting closer and closer to that 20. And
Yep.
so if he can exhaust Lao from those resources, from being able to get those removal pieces, then he can start playing some of his other characters that can also quest for a bunch of lore and really just starve Lao of removal.
Yeah. I wonder if this might be another Be Prepared turn. It's gonna be the last hard bit of removal other than the item removal that Lao has. But it's either gonna be that or the sword, and he might want to just keep the sword in in hand. Lao probably wants to draw into some of his Maleficents and stuff. But he is playing the Maurice. Okay. And being able to use the sword to take out that 3 lore questing Maleficent there. Honestly, I don't. Oh, that one cost item was really nice too for a little bit of added card draw, but I like it might have been potentially a little bit better if he played out the Be Prepared and had a little bit more time to use the Tamatoa. Excuse me. A little bit more time to use the Tamatoa, grab some more items, and get some more value out of the Maurice. But we'll see.
Yeah, we see in Zero's hand is still full of things like Hades, which will be good questers. Obviously, gets rid of this Maurice very easily. It does give Lao a little bit of extra ink, which I feel like is helpful. We know that he only has, I believe, one more Maurice in deck, right? That was only the third Maurice.
Yep.
And the more ink that Lao has, the more items he'll be able to play with Maurice, potentially getting even more and more value. So it's kind of a give and take there, for sure. But he's definitely going to have to take care of this board soon. I mean, Zero's all the way up to 14 lore. He's got 4 lore sitting on board, which should put him at 18 next turn.
Yeah.
He's getting dangerously close to basically critical mass.
Hmm.
Especially only sitting at 4 lore himself. He's been reacting most of this game, not being able to get on the offensive at any point. And it looks like we're going to see the Be Prepared come out to get rid of both of those. I'm sure Zero counting that as another Be Prepared out of his hand.
And the other like kind of tricky thing with those ramp cards is you don't know, neither player knows if that last Maurice or some Tamatoas got put in your inkwell. But in that case, I think Lao specifically did not choose to activate Mickey's ability just because he probably didn't want an accidental ink of something that might be really important.
Yeah, and for that exact reason, I think that's the right play, right? You don't want to
Yep.
accidentally get rid of that last Maurice.
Mhm.
Those ramp cards are great early game. You love to see them, but that's kind of the detriment of playing the ramp deck is once you get to the end of the game, they're not super useful other than just kind of having a body out on board. And we can see through Zero's draw and pass last turn, he said, I don't really care if you have a Mickey detective on board. I'm sitting at 14 lore. I have another Be Prepared in hand. I have plenty of ways to deal with your stuff. Um, we're going to see a little bit of pressure being applied with that Eye of the Fates card that is going to give Mickey an extra lore, can give anything extra lore for a turn. So there's a little bit of pressure going on, but Lao is definitely quite a few turns away from lethal right now, and Zero feels pretty comfortable with the state that he's in.
Yeah, and he also don't Lao doesn't have as much cards in hand. He has a lot more items, but unknown cards in hand, Zero is definitely in the lead there. And I am starting to get concerned for Lao. He oh that's a great draw with the sword. Because those he's definitely lacking in removal right now. Though I guess Tamatoa is another removal because he has swords or apples in his discard. But still, like it's I think it's going to be getting close to where those top decks really matter a lot more for Lao. But we can see that Eye of Fate is doing a lot of good work. All of a sudden, Lao is at 9 lore out of nowhere just because it can kind of give Mickey that quest for 2 and all of that good stuff. Honestly, once again, I see that Maui, and I'm just thinking in a control versus control matchup, anytime you can run out a Maui just to kill something may just be good. But I think right now Zero has a good game plan, which is trying to just pressure out the remaining cards in Lao's hand. And so then once Lao is in top deck mode, it just ends up being kind of a lot higher chances for Zero to be able to get the lore that he needs. But you can see the constant threat of the Eye of the Fates and that lore really forced out that Be Prepared from Zero's hand too.
I think that's such an interesting play too, because I was just thinking that, he's sitting there on the Be Prepared. Lao's doing a good job of applying that pressure, getting 3 lore every turn, but it's just a Mickey detective and a Grammatala, right? Like that's not something you really feel great about using a Be Prepared on. So it's very interesting to me that he didn't take that Maui play that you mentioned, because just having that Maui on board, I guess he does have the shield, so he could always ready something.
Yep.
But just having the Maui on board, threatens anything on board that's trying to quest and he can't ready that turn. And any ink that he's using up to use that shield is stuff that he can't play that turn as well.
Definitely. Well, kind of buckle up. Our audience is going to be getting a lot of be going to get used to hearing our voices because these are gonna definitely be longer games, right, Brandon? But
Yeah.
But right now, you can see Lao is starting to got a little bit of some more removal in the form of that Hades and that Tamatoa. So one other like really interesting kind of question is a lot of times it really you if you're in Lao's position, you're wondering, do I get back the apple? Do I get back the sword? Right? Because you're facing an opponent that runs both princesses and villains there. So
Yeah, if I'm Lao thinking about that, we've seen quite a few Hades, we've seen quite a few Maleficents. We know that that's the top end. We haven't seen too many princesses. Then there's also the threat of those three lore Maleficents.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like the sword is kind of a better play, even
Mm,
if it is a little bit expensive, mainly because you've seen those a lot. You haven't seen a princess at the very top. We have seen an Aladdin. We know that the Aladdin isn't affected by either other than just being exerted by the apple. And even then, rarely is anything on board long enough for you to even do anything about it. You would have to have a Maui in hand for that to really be effective. And at this point, it kind of looks like Zero is just he's gonna play things really slow. He's putting this Jasmine on board.
yeah.
It's not getting the trigger off, but that doesn't really matter. It's two lore on the board that Lao has to worry about. Inching closer and
Yeah.
closer, we see him play the Hades, immediately
Yo.
putting it back, and that's just another piece of removal that Zero has made Lao use because he has to. He can't risk doing anything else. And we obviously see the Hades and the Maleficent sitting in Zero's hand. He can kind of
Those
pocket those for a second,
yeah,
use
those two
one to take back
yeah.
this Hades.
Yup, but those two Sword of Truth is gonna be amazing against Zero's hand right now. So
Yeah, they're definitely going to put in the work. This is where the Sword of Truth shines for sure.
yep,
It's one of those cards that, it can be hit or miss depending on the matchup, but this
yep.
is definitely one of those where you see it shine.
Yep. And a note to the audience. I don't want to hover my cursor because both players can see where my cursor is located on the board. But if I could, I would totally want to like see how many cards are remaining in both players' decks because it really like it seems like both players have gone through a lot of cards in their decks, right? But we'll just kind of let it naturally kind of go through because we don't like I'm sure both players are well enough aware they're probably checking each other's deck counts and that sort of stuff, but just because we're doing commentary and we don't want to influence any plays, we're not going to move our cursor anywhere meaningful there. But I'm really curious as to kind of is this match going to end up being who has more cards in their deck or who decks out first, right?
Yeah, I didn't check
Yeah,
beforehand or count to see if both
yeah.
players were running 60 card decks or if
I
they were
believe
playing
so.
just over 60.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It,
it might come down to that. It might be who ended up drawing more and who ends up decking out first, especially it looks like Lao has had a little bit more draw. He usually can get at least two draws off of those Maurices that he's played. We
yeah.
see the fourth Maurice finally come down.
Yo.
So he's running through his deck faster. Again, those swords doing work against the
Yeah.
Maleficent. I know Lao is probably happy to see Zero having played that Maleficent and not getting a trigger off of it. It's one of those silver linings. You kind of have to take what you can get right now, being
Yo.
behind.
Yup, and that last Maurice just has to go, as expected. Um, and so, oh, that's interesting. That ward is gonna come in handy because that Maleficent has to target the Aurora. Um, so I honestly though, because both of them quest for two, I don't think Lao minds running the Maleficent out and targeting the Aurora. But it's funny because if Zero had two Auroras, that would have really hurt because they kind of would have protected each other. And so that I think early on in Lorcana, before like Gen Con, before we had all of the cards released, that used to be a really interesting strategy against control decks where we didn't have be prepared. We only had spot removal. Just being able to put two Auroras on the field was just devastating against that removal. But now with Be Prepared, it's a lot of resources that you don't want to kind of spend risking it against a control player.
Yeah, and I have to point out the awesome interaction that we see from from this card game, something that I've pointed out plenty of times is just how detailed I think the design team was when creating this card game. And so the interaction we just saw on board was we had Aurora Dreaming Guardian, which gives ward to everything else, protects everything else except for herself. She doesn't have ward, right? And then we saw Maleficent, Monstrous Dragon, come down, and the only thing that Maleficent can target is Aurora. And that's just one of the things that I love about this game. Had to point out the flavor behind that. I think it's so funny. But yeah, speaking of the Aurora thing, it's interesting. Zero only runs two Auroras, or at least Aurora Dreaming Guardians in his deck. And so that was the second Aurora. That's the last one we're going to see. But even that little bit of work, having to target the Aurora, that speed bump, it definitely does do some work. That's two lore that Zero was just able to get with Hades. And now he's threatening winning the game next turn if there's not a way that Lao can, which we obviously see he has another Maleficent in hand. He can take care of the Hades or the Robin Hood. But, it's just this whole game, it's been those little quests, those 2 lore per turn, those 3 lore per turn that Zero's been able to just squeeze out by forcing Lao to use removal when he hasn't wanted to or not had enough removal to get rid of stuff. Zero's done an amazing job at putting just enough out on the board to require answers, but not so much that he's devastated by something like a Be Prepared. It's been like 2 or 3 characters at a time where just one piece of removal isn't good enough, but you also don't want to waste one of those larger removal pieces as well.
Yeah. And I really like this play here by Lao just eking out that those little amounts of lore when he can. Playing Eye of the Fates on the Maleficent and re-readying with the shield. It's just those are the play that really makes or breaks kind of those control decks there, because those 3 lore could make a difference. He is kind of playing it a little bit safer there, rather than playing out the Maleficent and destroying that Robin Hood to prevent Zero from going to 18. He chose to let that Robin Hood survive. But I don't know. Maybe Lao thinks that 18 is not too bad of a threshold right now. But honestly, I probably would have played out the Maleficent rather than the Maui. Took out the Robin Hood, quested with the Maleficent ready, and then took out the Hades with the Maleficent that turn. But we'll see. I don't know if 18 lore versus 16 really makes too much of a difference here.
Yeah, that Maui draw from Zero was detrimental. He just needed something else that he could play on board for lore. This is going to be a really close game. That Eye of the Fates and the Shield are putting in so much work, being able to get that extra lore every turn. We see the Be Prepared forced out from Zero. It was getting scary close there for Lao. It looked like he was having the edge. That Be Prepared is at a great time, huge value. And now Lao is, again, back in a spot where he just has to respond. We see the Jasmine come down. It's 2 lore. Zero wins next turn if Lao can't do anything. And again, we see he has removal in his hand, but it's forcing removal out of Lao. He's only going to have so much in his deck that he's drawing.
Yeah, I think the other in general is potentially playing develop your brain first just to see. But I wonder if no, both players must be careful about the number of cards in their deck. That has to be the reason why Lao is not playing develop your brain. Trying to last a little bit longer here.
Zero really needs to pull some sort of hard removal in this draw. Maui's not going to do it because that shield, I mean, the shield's putting in work. He can just ready up the Maleficent every turn.
And as we say that, he top decks the Dragonfire. Ouch.
Exactly what he needs.
Yeah.
How ironic, Dragonfiring the Maleficent.
Yeah, ouch. So, there's another really relevant threat now.
Yeah, Yeah, this one, I mean, it really doesn't matter how much willpower these have because of the
Yeah.
sword or because of the shield, but yeah, the Tamatoa is pretty,
It's
I mean,
threateningly lethal. Yeah.
yeah, it's threatening lethal next turn as soon as it can
Wow.
quest, so it's gonna require a top deck from Zero here.
Yeah.
Um,
He's probably looking through his discard thinking, what on earth can I pull in order to get rid of that Tamatoa? Um, I do after the players finish this first game, I am interested in how many cards Lao has remaining in his deck because I wonder how close it came. All right.
oh man,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
I'm
I'm
sitting on
actually
the edge of my seat.
yeah, I'm actually amazed. Lao piloted this matchup so well. It's I think he was always slightly disadvantaged. But he managed to just do what he needed in order to kind of get all of the kind of oomph out of his deck, and that was what Okay, so he is playing the develop your brain, probably sensing that he's on the verge of winning and trying to grab that little bit more um uh in order to kind of just outrace the opponent. And I do think that in general, Lao probably has more cards drawn. Let's see what Zero draws. That's a
This is gonna make
Grammatala.
it.
That's not gonna do it.
Oh, that's not gonna do it. I think that means that Lao has taken game
Yeah.
1.
Yup. Well done. How many cards now? I'm
Wow.
curious. 8 cards left versus 13. So
Yeah, getting
that's
dangerously close on both sides.
Mhm.
Man, that is crazy. I mean, I think this is a great example of seeing just how great Lao used those items. He knew which items he wanted to get rid of, throw in the inkwell. The things like the eye and the shield putting in tons of work. Those swords just coming back and coming back, getting rid of all of the stuff on Zero's side of the board so that he didn't have to use cards in hand to take care of it. I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest. For a while, I mean, Zero really was putting the pressure on there most of the game. But just like we said at the beginning, Tamatoa is scary. If it can come down onto the board and it can stick, especially later in the game when there's more and more items that have come out on the board, if you don't have a way to take care of it, I mean, it ends games immediately.
Yeah, I think both players are going to be aware of exactly how close these games are. I think there's only a few threats like one other huge consideration is that removal versus like kind of threat count, right? And so I think what both players recognize is they need to like really make the use out of all of their removals. Try to get more of those 2-for-1, 3-for-1s from the be prepared. Use those Mauis a little bit better. If try to use those Mauis rather than hard removal. Especially from Zero's perspective, right? Once those shields comes out, that Maui is not putting in much work at all. So you can bet that like this upcoming game, he's gonna be really paying attention to all of the opportunities where he can actually use the Mauis rather than have it be a card that he doesn't want to draw.
Right, I think that's going to make or break these games actually for those reasons that you said. You know, Zero runs more of the units, so it's going to require more removal pieces from Lao. Lao's going to have to use those be prepareds really efficiently. He's going to have to use the Mauis really efficiently. And Zero knows that, okay, the Tamatoas and the Maurices are the grade A things that I have to look out for and remove. Other than that, it's not too crazy. There's some Hades that are out there. I'm trying to look at
Maleficence.
the, yeah,
Yeah.
some Maleficents that are gaining 2 lore. Once the Eye of the Fates comes out, that's a little scary, and with
Yeah.
with the shield, that's a little scary, but that's nothing crazy. You can take those out with your Dragonfires, with your Hades, with your freezes even. Or
Yeah,
sorry, let it goes.
yep, I do think this is one of the showcase where that Eye of the Fate is doing more than its fair share of work because I think Lao was able to probably generate at least 6 or 7 lore out of that Eye of Fates alone that game.
Yeah, and with zero item removal, that's probably the item duo that I'm the most scared of seeing right now is another sword, I'm sorry, another shield and another Eye of the Fates because for that reason, your Maui's become useless the moment that happens. You're basically gaining an extra lore every single turn. You're spending a lot of ink, but who cares? You have 12 13 ink in your inkwell towards the late of the game or towards later into the game, and we saw just how close Lao was, or I mean, Lao did win. He caught all the way back up miraculously just from that Eye of the Fates and shield combo.
Yep. And I think now that both players have an understanding of each player's deck, we'll see a lot more targeted inks now. Like for example, I saw a zero ink that Aurora ward and essentially just opting really to keep all of his removal in his hand, regardless of how slow it is. And that makes a lot of sense because at the end of the day, I think he might sense that one of his only ways potentially to beat Lao's deck is to deck him out. Especially given this slow start of a hand here. I don't imagine him being able to get to that 20 lore anywhere as easily as he almost got there in game one. So I think what he's potentially his game plan this game is just to like make sure, okay, opponent's probably gonna draw a few more cards than I do, but probably not too much if I can just deal with the Maurices as they come down, and try to not let the opponent get too much value off of the Robin Hoods, and see if I can just have enough removal to take out every single one of my opponent's threats.
Yeah, and we just see the typical control early game right now being played so slowly. That's gotta hurt. Seeing Zero get rid of one of those Maleficents, you know that Lao's counting that. That's one less removal piece. He's opting to throw down the Maleficent, which is really interesting. There's only going to be 5 ink available to Lao next turn because of the Discord overlay. I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing the hand for Lao, so I can't see if he has
Oh,
any.
uh,
Um,
I can probably move it a little bit here. Does
you
this
can
help?
move,
Or I
yeah,
can focus on his hand. Hold on.
even if it just a little bit up, we can probably still see both sets of cards. For some reason, the Discord overlay isn't
Got it.
going off, but
Does this
yeah,
help a little bit? Okay.
yes, yeah, that's
Okay.
awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
So we
So what?
already see the Eye of the Fates come down. That's going to be huge because every single turn from now on, that Eye of the Fates is going to be putting in extra work. We see both players, it looks like they're both playing kind of aggressively. I think they're trying to put pressure on each other, just bumping up that lore while you can. You know this is going to be a long game, but the little bit that you can inch towards that 20 lore, might do the difference. If I'm Zero, I'm kind of scared of the Eye of the Fates. You have to get rid of the stuff on board because you don't want Lao getting any value out of this card if possible.
Yeah, and I really think that in some strange sense, I wasn't sure about Zero's play with the Maleficent. It almost feels like that 3 lore Maleficent might have been a little bit better suited for a card that goes into the Inkwell, because now he is falling a little bit behind. He's still 2 turns away from a Be Prepared. And I don't foresee him being able to quest that much with the Maleficent. But then again, we also do have like the benefit of our casting, so we know that Lao has a Maui to run into that Maleficent. But I think in some of these matchups, it may be potentially valuable just to choose one strategy and stick with it. So rather than like trying to like slowly quest up and then deal with control, just outright do control period. Forget about questing and just try to have enough of a board presence, have your inks available in order to kind of not make, I guess, inking awkward, right? Because right now he needs to ink the Aurora, and potentially if he gets another uninkable, he might need to ink another one of his Maleficents, which is really hard to swallow.
Yeah, I can't remember if Eye of the Fates was already down by the time Maleficent was played or not. But I can understand if the Eye of the Fates was there, why you might want to play the Maleficent. If not, then I kind of agree. I don't understand the Maleficent play, mainly because you just know that there's a lot of removal that's being played, and then that Eye of the Fates coming down, if the Maleficent was already down, is detrimental because he has to spend a turn getting rid of the Mickey and the Grandma Tala. So that's one turn that you're not questing with that 3 lore. Luckily, he's still able to get a quest out, but again, we see the Maui come down, very likely taking out the Maleficent. That's exactly what's going to happen. You
Yep.
don't want a 3 lore character to be out on the board for very long at all.
Yeah,
And
and
again, just that Eye of Fates doing more work.
yeah, again, like I mean, I think thankfully he got a Maui. Absolutely play out the Maui rather than ink it to play like a removal. Play out the Maui, take out the Mickey because the opponent's Maui can't quest, so Eye of the Fate will not do anything there.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like we're seeing from both sides. We mentioned before these guys have to use these Mauis while they can, while they can get some value out of it. Use that instead of your other removal, and it's just kind of Maui's bumping fists back and forth for the next couple of turns. It looks
Oh
like.
man, yeah. Lots of Mauis. But kind of going back to that Maleficent play. Yeah, it's super like kind of clear now that like kind of Zero's a little bit at the mercy of the top decks. To get something that's hopefully not super relevant to Ink. But if he still had that Maleficent, he would have been able to get to that 7. Um, 7 kind of cost for the Be Prepared's ready on board. So I wonder now if he's going to actually ink that Maleficent or just pass quest with the Mickey, or is he gonna run it out? Yeah, he's gonna run it out. I think he still wants to keep up the pressure. I think yeah, totally viable. But I think it's not gonna be. I think Lao is happy to see this line of play because of his Maui's on the board.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Lao's hand is really interesting because we don't see any items, but we see 2 Tamatoas and a Maurice, which normally isn't good. But seeing both of those Mauis, seeing Zero put out these Maleficents, at this point, Zero has to decide, is the 3 lore worth it right now to quest with these Maleficents? Are you gonna use something to get rid of the Maui? It looks like, okay, he's inking to let it go. He could potentially get rid of the Maui, use some removal, and I feel like for Zero, you're totally fine with that. That's a piece of removal that's not going to hit a Maurice or a Tamatoa later on in the game. It does put pressure on, or it does mean that Zero is putting on extra pressure, and you kind of hope that you draw into stuff later. But even with that Maui removed, obviously Zero doesn't know this, but he's sitting on another Maui in hand right now. He's not too worried about it currently.
Yup. I think honestly, the fact that Lao doesn't have any hard removal in his hand may help help him or may help Zero with his plan of just getting down kind of these creatures and questing. So for example, we can totally see a Dragonfire just to remove that Maui so that he can gain some extra lore with the Hades too. What Zero probably really wants is to be at 9 ink so that he could play out the Maleficent to kill the Maui and then quest, but he is still only on 7 ink, so
Yeah, Zero keeps running into these really just unfortunate situations where he has both the Blue Maleficent and the Monstrous Dragon Maleficent in hand as the only things to ink, and he kind of has to decide, do I ink something this turn? Do I get rid of one of those so that I can get closer to that 9 so I can get more ink? Or do I just have to sit on this 7 ink with this basically dead Maleficent Monstrous Dragon in hand?
right.
He doesn't know this, but obviously, if he saw Lao's hand right now, knowing that there's no hard removal,
Yep.
those Maleficents can put in work. You can throw the Maleficents down. They're going to quest for 3 lore. We see him take out the Maui with the Dragonfire, I imagine, just like you said, so that he
Yep.
can quest with Hades this turn.
Yep.
Again, we see the pressure going on. They're a lot closer in lore than they were last
Yeah.
game, but
Yep.
from each point of view, we do see the Hades come down,
Yeah.
but from each point of view, Zero's sitting in a good spot to put on a lot of pressure, and maybe in this game a little earlier than last.
I still think it's way too risky to kind of go with the assumption that opponent doesn't have removal for any of the cards that you're going to be playing. Generally, whenever I play a control matchup, I just assume that none of my creatures are going to stick on board. But having said that, the Hades is actually not too bad of a play from Zero's perspective, because that gave him a little bit more ink to play around with too. So that's, I guess, there is a reason why the Disney design or Ravensburger designers put for Hades. Is there a downside to this, right? Very, very ironic.
Yeah, just like you said, in the ruby sapphire colors, there's so much removal in both of those colors, hard removal. You just have to assume whatever hits the board is not going to last for more than a turn. So I definitely understand that. But yeah, just repeating what you said, the Hades coming down is definitely going to help. Um, Zero get to that 9 lore that he wants. We see the Be Prepared coming down, just getting rid of the Tala and the Hades, trying to reset the board, reset everybody. Hopefully next turn, Zero can draw an inkable card so we can start getting these Maleficents out on board, getting rid of, hopefully, these Maurices and Tamatoas. Lao's having a really difficult time. He's only drawn the sword. Or, I'm sorry, I keep calling it sword. He
Shield.
draws the shield, which again is that pretty nasty combo, the shield and the Eye of the Fates coming out on the board. You're kind of scared to see that. You saw how much work it did last game. I'm sure that this Maurice is not going to last more than one turn. He's only going to get one
No.
draw off.
Yeah. Absolutely not. But I think he has enough ink. Yeah, he has enough ink for the Maleficent. Um, to just remove the Maurice outright. But there is another one waiting in the back ranks for Lao. So, oh, and there is an item there. Unfortunately, it is the item that he does not want to see. He would want the sword rather than the apple right now. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you ever use the Be Prepared on this one Maleficent? I feel like that's not worth it. Nope. He's going to use the Maurice and then play the Apple afterwards just to draw more cards, see if he can come into anything.
yep. But yeah, so the interesting thing is, it also, like, we can probably tell that Zero is probably gonna run out his Maleficent to kill the Maurice and Quest. But now, like, with 2 Maleficents on board, absolutely no question asked that Be Prepared is coming down, right? So,
Right.
and I don't think you can, like, really play around that. So, I mean,
No, I think
the clutch play actually might just be to let it go to Maurice and quest with the dragon.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to slow play it and avoid that, be prepared. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
And
even I would play out the Maleficent. Like,
yeah,
yep,
you still get
yep,
the quest
yep.
off. You get rid of the be prepared. The problem, I'll be really interested. We're getting really close to this top deck mode. Both players are kind of having a hard time drawing cards. Lao, obviously, you just only got one draw off of 2 of those Maurices, which isn't a whole lot of value. But Zero is, I mean, he's down to a 3-card hand, and
But
he's
yeah,
probably not inking a whole lot anymore. But we see 3 Tamatoas with 3 other items on board, possibly more coming down. We see the shield, we see the eye. Is there a world in which Zero runs out of removal and one of these Tamatoas stick? We see the Let It Go, we see the Be Prepared, but with a couple unlucky draws, as Lao might be able to get a Tamatoa to get a really sizable quest in, and at 10 lore, that could push him over the top.
yeah, and the more I see it, the more I like those Tamatoas, because essentially with that one uh sword, it's essentially 4 removal cards, 4 Dragonfires in hand from Lao. So that's definitely gonna be a bit difficult to kind of deal with there. So I wonder I think what is going to be really important. Oh, that's going to be a great Robin Hood. It's neither a princess nor a villain. So, unfortunately, the apple or the sword isn't gonna help there. But I'm just wondering, how is Zero gonna make the use most out of his Maui? Because once again, we keep on harping. That shield is out, so that Maui is very difficult to fully utilize there.
Yeah, and Lao doesn't draw any hard removal for that Robin Hood either. So,
Mm,
and like, there's not much he can do. That's just gonna be an extra 2 lore the next turn that Zero gets to, and too many turns with that, and Zero's gonna just squeeze by.
yeah, so clearly Robin Hood is a better card against this sort of apple sword deck. That's interesting, but I think unless barring another hard removal, we're gonna see a let it go on that Tamatoa probably.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense here. You just can't let the Tamatoa stick. And like, I mean, Zero's in a pretty good spot right now. You played the Let It Go, get rid of the Tamatoa, quest for 2 more with Robin
Yep.
Hood. You're basically on a 3 turn clock. You can try to play another character out,
Yeah.
maybe get more lore. You see the apple there. Maybe
Yeah.
he baits the apple
Yep.
play. I mean, we see another Jasmine in
Jasmine.
hand that he can play next turn.
Yep. Oh, but that's see, like there's plenty of removal on Lao's side of things to deal with the Hades. So
Yeah, if I'm Lao, I'm
uh,
taking a deep breath after that one. You're you're
yo
very
yo
happy to see the Hades.
definitely. And then he's probably gonna trigger the apple. Yeah, for only one. Most of the cost is up front, right? For the apple 3. But
Yeah.
for only one to be able to remove that Aurora is huge. And then figuring out all of his untapped cards to play out the Mickey. Is he going to ink something? He's probably looking at his discard to see if there's anything super important in his deck that he doesn't want to go into his ink.
Yeah, and I don't think it's super important that he gets anything to his ink either. He's already at 11 ink.
Mm.
So he might be
Yeah,
thinking of maybe a Swords Tamatoa play if he has to get both out in one turn. He is deciding to throw something into his ink. So he ultimately decided that the odds of him putting something in there super important must have been pretty low.
I'm thinking this might be a be prepared turn. Especially given that Zero drew into another bit of removal. But ironically, so what's likely gonna happen? Lao can quest for 4 if he doesn't deal with his board, and then re-ready something. And I guess he can run into the character that isn't readied with the Maui, but that's skirting dangerously on the edge very dangerously, my friend there. But it seems like
Yeah.
that is going to be what Zero chooses to do. Yeah, still not super uh or Lao isn't threatening lethal. Zero probably has 2-ish more turns of questing before kind of threatening lethal, but it's certainly scary. And yeah, Lao is just drawing plenty of removal now that he needs.
Yeah, now Lao is getting to this point where he has 2 Tomatoes in hand, he has a Hades in hand. Whatever he throws on board is going to threaten lethal next turn. So you're forcing something out of the 3 cards that Zero has in hand and whatever he top decks. Plus, you have a Hades in hand for whatever he throws on board next turn,
Mm,
after he very likely gets rid of your turn. Or if he can't get rid of your stuff, you're getting much, much closer to the win condition. So now we see things
yeah,
having kind of flipped where Lao is really putting the pressure on Zero, forcing something out of Zero. We immediately see the Be Prepared coming
yup,
down. I mean, it has to happen this turn,
yup.
and lots of good value out of it. But again, there's still a lot of stuff that Lao can do to put pressure on even after this.
Definitely. And another showcase of just that Maui sitting sadly in hand, not being able to do too much there. And ironically, I think Grandma is another card that neither the sword or the apple can kill. So.
Yeah, and it's one of those pesky cards. It reminds me a little bit of Olaf. I remember when we were testing games early on. Olaf is such a problem card because he's so little. You don't want to put a whole lot of resources into getting rid of it. And I feel like the Grammatala is doing the same thing right now. A
Hmm.
Zero's at 15 lore. You don't want to waste a removal piece like a Dragonfire or a Hades on something as small as Tala. But I mean, you can't let that card go for very long with questing because that's just getting him very dangerously close to 20 lore.
Hmm. Yeah. Another developer brain to search out something hopefully. Now Aladdin is but there's too many hard removals. Yeah, like I think what might have saved Zero a bit early on was getting the Aladdins on board rather than that Robin Hood. Because back then Lao didn't have the Dragonfires or the Hades to deal with the Aladdin there. But right now we can see, I mean, what you just said previously may make a difference, Brandon. Of we might honestly see a Hades or a Dragonfire come down on that Grammatala.
Yeah, and luckily for Lao, I mean, the Aladdin is definitely a threat if left on board too long, but we see two forms of removal with Hades and Dragonfire. So, unless Zero draws into even more stuff, using something like a Hades isn't terrible. You're getting a body on board that demands removal. You're getting the Tala's going back in the Inkwell, which she was going to anyway, if
That's a
she was
great, yeah,
banished.
that's a great draw by Hades, top decking the Hades. Man, I think we called it earlier on. Like that top deck is just gonna be like whoever top decks the most Grammatalas is probably not gonna be doing super well.
Yeah. I think that's like the third Hades top deck for this game too.
Hmm.
Where they just come in just at the right moment. And it's honestly kind of funny. It's like they're playing some game of ping pong. Like they just one person puts a Hades down and the next person puts a Hades
Wow,
down. Now throw a
that's
sword.
yeah,
There's another one. Speaking of the devil,
yeah.
literally, like he just keeps coming down, doing damage. We're gonna
I
see a little bit of pressure being put down with the Aladdin, kind of threatening the core
yeah.
steal, daring
Oh
the
wow, and
Grammatala to
and top
quest.
decking top decking the Maleficent from Lao, amazing. That's coming
Yeah, you're
down, no
definitely
question
happy to see
asked.
that. Yeah, you have to
Ouch.
get rid of the Aladdin.
Yup. And then re-readying the Tala, probably. There's no reason not to re-ready her. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's now Lao is threatening lethal. The Hades is coming down, no questions asked on the Maleficent there. But I think this game will definitely give the advantage, even though the score is tied up. We'll have to give the advantage to Lao. Has two and the reason why is we're just counting the number of removals in hand, and the quality of cards on board, and the two items are excellent quality. um and Lao has the apple and the dragonfire for spot removal there. But we're gonna see potentially the game getting closed out by Grammatala. Because he's gonna, oh yeah, the shield doesn't need to go into discard. It's gonna be re-readied, and unless Zero can find an answer to that Grammatala next turn, it's gonna be game. Yeah, and none of that
Yeah,
is removal.
wow.
Wow, that's a great games.
Yeah, so Lao takes game two,
Two.
going on
Yep.
to round five, semifinals of the Lorcana HQ uh, constructed tournament. Man, I feel like the Sword and I were just like the MVP duo for this
Yo,
game.
yeah,
Both
there
games, they
was
just put in
yeah,
so much work.
yeah, there was just so much removal from Lao's deck there. But I think honestly both of these games were really close there. And part of it might just be whichever deck was slightly easier, ironically, like to pilot for the the matchup. I wouldn't say Lao's deck is easy to pilot by any means, but I think in this like kind of control versus control matchup, there's only so many things that you can do as either players, and potentially like kind of that lack of experience. I've certainly never played against Lao's deck, and I don't play too much against Zero's deck either. So like not knowing the matchup super well certainly could have made an impact on how the players played their game and stuff. But all that to say though is I definitely think that Lao has a amazing deck. So we've seen it run into Amber Steel mid range no problem, and now we've seen it run into uh Sapphire Ruby control no problem. So yeah, I'm actually really curious to see how the deck ends up going against some of the other archetypes, right? Like the Ruby Amethyst controls, or the Amber Emerald aggro decks. So
Yeah, at this point, I'm asking myself, what beats this deck? Is it Lao just piloting it so well? He mentioned last
yeah.
time, he spent a couple weeks just refining this deck, and I've loved that it was all created because he wanted to show people how great Poison Apple was, and although Swords was kind of the highlight of this round, like you can just see the flexibility that these items give Lao in this deck. When playing against basically a mirror control match. These items are giving him the flexibility of, okay, he knows he can't do much with the or the Maurices. He knows he can't do a whole lot with Tamatoas unless it's very late game and the other opponent has gotten rid of most of their removal, and we just see him using the combo of the Eye of the Fates and the Shield to get those little bits of lore from characters like Grammatala, from characters like Mickey. I love this deck. It's crafted so well. And honestly, like I think it has a pretty good shot at just taking the tournament altogether. We'll have to see what else he's paired up against. I remember seeing that there was quite a bit of Ruby still in the top cut of the tournament. But obviously we see that he doesn't have a ton of problem running into that because he has a bunch of removal himself, and anything other than Sapphire paired with Ruby, he's probably got just as much removal, if not more, than anything else that he's going to run into. So I'll be very interested to see what he pairs up with next, and how the deck fares against it.
Definitely. The more I see Lao playing kind of this deck, the more excited I am about like kind of how it seems like he's definitely, you can tell he's run this decks many times and is super familiar with it and knows all of the nuances and ins and outs of it. So I feel like I'm learning so much just by watching him play Lorcana in general, but also piloting this deck too.
Absolutely. I'm going to see if we want to get Lao in here.
Yep, I think I definitely invited him to hop onto the main stage. I also invited Zero to hop onto the main stage too. So we'll see. I think they might still be kind of like talking with each other a little bit. But once they show up on the main stage, I will definitely give them microphone abilities. And yeah, also I'll be a little bit better this time checking the chat. If anyone has some questions that they want to ask Lao if he comes on, or Zero if he comes on, feel free to type them in chat. There's no guarantees that I'll be able to get to all of them, but I'll definitely rather than me having to come up with all of the questions to ask him, maybe look for some of you guys in chat who might have some messages there. So
Yeah, I've kept chat closed because I don't believe I can open chat.
Here is
and
Lao.
also, is he here?
Yep, I just invited him to speak, and Zero as well. So we will invite both both players to speak. And just also just in general, congratulations to an excellent showcase. And some really close and really great games there.
Yeah, that was a super grind, just like we thought from both sides. And honestly, like either one could have taken both of those games. Each game was extremely close, and it was a well fought battle. Both players obviously were piloting their deck very well. And it was just overall a very interesting and very fun match to watch for sure.
Yeah. Um, I wonder if they're having issues of being able to be promoted to speaker or
Let me see if I can do anything about that.
show requests, invite sent. And it might just be they need a small break too after what was two pretty grueling games there.
Oh yeah.
So
If it were me, my brain would be fried after games like this for sure.
Yup.
I'm having a hard time
Oh,
finding
hold on.
Zero.
I see a message from Lao. Can I re-invite? The menu is blocking me being able to click the accept button. There's like an overlay. Okay, I will continue to try
Interesting.
to extend the invite.
Hello? Oh,
Oh,
I'm here. Hello.
Oh, hi Zero. What's
hello.
up?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Great job piloting your deck. That was such an
Thank you.
interesting deck, dude.
Oh,
Both games were so close.
Oh yeah. Uh, Oh yeah,
Uh,
no, that was brutal. I mean, so I heard about his deck, obviously. Everyone was kind of talking about it. And
yeah.
the first thing I thought was, wow, I have a lot of villains and princesses. I don't know how pretty this is gonna be.
Yeah, honestly, for a deck that has so many villains and princesses, like you still got dangerously close both times to winning. And I mean, we mentioned in our commentary that like those swords put in work. I mean, being able to get the swords, get rid of your Maleficents, both kinds of Maleficents. Like, had he not had those, he would have had to use different removal options. Maybe he would have ran out sooner. So like even for a deck that was running princesses and villains, you did very well.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
I made
no,
it up
it
on
was.
stage. I was gonna say,
There you are.
if you see the top decks there, if he had one more removal spell, I was done for
Yeah.
like the next 4 turns.
Yeah, we
Wow.
were laughing at the top decks. Both of you were top decking Hades like left and right. I think there were like 3 or 4 Hades top decks like almost back to back.
Yeah, no, I was banking on my develop your brains a lot. I was.
One of our earlier predictions before you guys even started is we're like it's probably gonna come down to top deck like and the interesting thing is it wasn't even that like you guys didn't have a hand top deck. It was just that you needed to top deck more removal or like that sort of stuff. So
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I mean the other brutal part was I think a big part of my deck is I have to like challenge him. Like I have Maui's and Aladdin's, and I just wasn't
Mm.
allowed to do that either. So it was just a big wake up call. I was like, wow, can't do anything.
Yeah, we mentioned like the MVP duo for both of those matches were the Eye of Fates and that shield. Like it
Oh,
just
absolutely.
completely rendered
Yeah.
those Maui's useless, like dead cards in hand, and just being able to quest little by little, like catching back up. Because I mean, Zero, you were putting pressure on, especially for that first game, really hard. You were getting really close to winning, and Lao was just able to catch up slowly but surely with that Eye of Fates and shield for sure.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a tough call because I think every single time I was like, I had to put like multiple villains to make him like, to make it so that Sword of Truth was like more difficult to attack one of them. But then I was also running into like be prepared if I kept like piling cards onto the board. So yeah, tough choice all around.
Yeah, that's
That's
the like mental gymnastics in the Ruby Sapphire versus Ruby Sapphire decks. It's like there's just so much removal. It's like you just have to assume whatever you put on board is not going to last for more than one turn.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one question I have to ask Lao here is, so what do you think was the kind of toughest decision or like choices that you had to make during that game there?
The resources I think were pretty tough. And well, I think I don't know. It's hard to tell. I couldn't, I don't have his deck list here. I didn't know how many Be Prepared he was running. I didn't know. I assumed once, I saw so many that he was running the 4 Mal, the 4 Hades. He was running Let It Go and Dragonfire. I think another hard point was like, do I do I overdevelop or do I try and eke ahead by committing to the board a little bit more, or do I hold back and just keep the one unit in my hand and one unit on the field? And I think the second game was a little bit easier because I drew into a lot more of those smaller units and I had the Eye of the Fates, so I was able to kind of bait out, I think, a lot of the removal just because I was questing for 2 or 3 with just little guys, and I think that made the second game a little bit easier in that regards.
Definitely. Yeah, and trying to figure, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, trying to figure out what cards you can afford to put into your ink, and what cards will be useful later down the line is always a tough kind of question in that control matchup there. You only run one Eye of the Fates in your deck, right? After this, are you going to consider potentially putting in more, or one seems to be that sweet spot of like putting enough pressure, eventually being able to draw into it and using it to quest out there?
I was telling Zero the the item package. It does bring relevant items to different matches, as we saw, right? But largely it's there to lay down Maurice and try and get 2, 3, 1-drop items and cycle to what I would consider the actual good cards of the deck, which are the removal, the Mals, the Hades, the Be Prepareds. And then, obviously, like I said, they're relevant at later stages of the game, but really it's just there to do that. And what I ran, I was running more Eye of the Fates before, and what was happening is I was getting Maurice, and then like the 4-cost Eye of the Fates, the 3-cost Apple, the 4-cost Sword, and what happened is, Maurice is obviously a huge target, and so I wouldn't be able to cycle like I'd like. And I was very close to cutting all of the Eye of the Fates. This one specifically for just another Scepter, just to just lay down.
Cycle more, get more value out of the Maurices.
Get more value. But I think that it's pulled its weight in these games, and I would keep at least the one. I might consider going back to 2, depending,
on what the current meta and stuff.
Yeah.
That is really cool. I do notice everyone surprisingly this game we're all expecting the apple that you included, the sword, to do a lot of work. Everyone's harping on the Eye of the Fate now, so
that's something that I love about the deck being showcased. Is it's like you just have so much flexibility with this deck. Like in 2 days ago we saw the apple being played very well. I mean, even in this game, like Eye of the Fates and Shield were definitely the MVPs, getting you just where you needed to for the lore. But I mean, I can't even remember how many times you use swords in the past, in those 2 games, cycling them out with the Tamatoas. And so, like, even though they're a little bit chunky and people might overlook them for their usefulness, it just works, man. Like, just kind of splashing all the items and all of them kind of do their own thing, and you just kind of pick which ones you need for the matchup. Like, it's awesome to see.
I like that it turns Tamatoa into a very expensive Maleficent. Is basically what it does. And if he sticks on the board, then he's even better.
More.
So he's got very very high ceiling. But he pulls with weight.
Yeah, I was about to say before commentating, I haven't played with Tamatoa too much, so I was just thinking its effect only triggers when it quests, right? But no, like then I took another look at the card, and you get some value out of him no matter what, as long as you play him out on the board. So that's super nice because essentially each copy of a Tamatoa is another removal card there. So um. Let's see. I think one kind of last question I have for Lao is so you only have two more matches remaining there. Is there any particular matchups that you're like more hoping to play against, and any sort of matchups that you're less hoping to play against there? Just from like kind of your experience piling the deck. And feel free, like you don't have to kind of answer that question, but I'm just curious because we've only seen, I think, you run this deck against a Amber Steel mid range. And at least I've only seen it against an Amber Steel mid range and a Sapphire Ruby control. So there's probably a whole gamut of other kind of archetypes that this deck probably does really well against, and some that it probably doesn't do as good against, right?
Yeah, I definitely love seeing the mid range. I think this deck, for the most part, has a lot of answers into it. It doesn't pressure early, and a lot of the late game threats are, either villains in Hades or villains in or princesses rather. Stitch is sometimes scary depending on the matchup. I think the scariest one is actually Amethyst Ruby, in my opinion. You once again, it's a grindy game, and I think what it comes down to, depending on how the Amethyst Ruby deck is built, is they have more draw and they can find their answers. There's turns where, in the first game too, I think we passed back and forth maybe 3 turns in a row, just like trying to bait out the first move. And while you're doing that in the Amethyst Ruby, they're mirroring or using friends on the other side, and they're just stocking their hand with answers. And I found it to be a very difficult matchup, and I would like to avoid that as much as possible.
Let's just hope that all of the Amethyst Ruby players run into the Amber Emerald aggro decks first of all.
Yes, please. And aggro, honestly, sometimes it feels like a coin flip. Like it's pitch 7 cards for Be Prepared and some ramp and hope they don't get there. If you can hit that first Be Prepared, and you can, I found you can often stabilize off the back of that, but it's a lot more draw dependent. So sometimes that one feels like a coin flip.
Yeah, that's amazing insight. Thank you so much, Lao, for just being with us again, and both of you guys, Lao and Zero, for completely willing to kind of open up, allow us to stream and cast, and really, hopefully, expanding this Lorcana community, especially a little bit more of that competitive kind of gameplay, and just providing, I think, a lot of good data and insight and just lessons for that the rest of us can slowly start absorbing. So.
Of course, it was my pleasure. I feel like I've been in the chat like since the beginning, like talking mad. I've been saying how Sword of Truth is a terrible card, and I feel like Lao just delivered my penance to me. So feeling a little humbled today.
It's I think we would all be there with you, Zero, of thinking that it wasn't going to be a super relevant card until we kind of got surprised by Lao's deck list. So I would definitely say you weren't the only one. Cool. Hey Brandon. Do you have any kind of last thoughts or questions you have for the players?
I have one last question. I don't know where either of you are located, but are either of you, I mean, obviously you guys are doing really well in the tournament. You've made it to round 4. Are any of you planning to go to Miami and compete in person?
So I actually went to Gen Con, so that was a long trip. I'm pretty tired. I'm sure you are too. You're pretty tired from
Yeah,
Gen
still
Con.
recovering
I
from
don't
Gen
think
Con.
I'm not gonna be traveling for that kind of business for a while. I also have a vacation coming up, so I'm gonna go chill out instead.
Dude, yeah, enjoy that vacation.
I'll be honest. I've been pretty busy lately. I did not know that there was a is it like a sanctioned uh, Ravensburger tournament?
So it's not a sanctioned Ravensburger tournament, but it's like a third-party tournament. I don't remember which company is actually hosting it. It's in October, October 21st to 22nd, and as far as I know, it's going to be the first like large constructed Lorcana tournament.
If I can make it happen, I will. So we'll see. We'll see. I think I
Yeah.
mentioned last week a lot's going to depend on the supply, but I think by October
Oh
we
yeah.
should have sufficient cards from the second wave and everything. So
Yeah, I think it'll be really cool. I'm super excited about this the end of this week and this weekend and next week, like early on, seeing what the atmosphere looks like, right? Though it's been really difficult for us. So me and my wife live in Wisconsin, and there aren't too many easily accessible like OP stores that we could find that's running Lorcana events. So we're still racking our brains to kind of figure out like local kind of LGS to do Lorcana stuff with. But from what it sounds like, there's a lot of places in Chicago, or like in some of the bigger cities, Florida, that sort of stuff, that has plenty of those opportunities. So definitely wish the best of everyone here, anyone who's interested in Lorcana, to be able to find be able to get their hands on product and be able to find a nice community just to play in person with there. So
Yeah, I'm in the Chicagoland area, so I'm hoping some good locals tournaments.
Oh yeah, there's some HQ members around that area.
We've been talking.
nice.
I'll probably be running into them.
All right, guys. Well,
Right.
we really
Really
appreciate
cool.
you coming onto the stream and coming to talk about the decks and stuff for a little while. It's getting a little late. We don't want to keep you guys up any later than we have to. So, yeah, great job, guys, all around. We'll be watching Lao through the rest of the rounds. There's 2 more rounds left. So,
I'm happy. I'm happy to do the same. We got what 2 days for the next one, and then another 2 days after that. So
yeah, I
Sounds
think the
great.
finals
if
are
we can
gonna
take it the
land
whole way.
close to the release. So that's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was a
Yeah.
fun being here.
Thanks for being here. Thank you everyone who's able to attend. We always appreciate everyone in the community too. So thank you, and with that we'll call it a stream.
Yeah, before we end, I'll give you guys the opportunity if you guys want to plug your socials or
yeah.
anything. I don't know if you guys have any socials, but go ahead and plug them.
Oh, well, I have a YouTube channel. I just started though, but yeah, Zero to Hero, but not very much yet. But I'll probably be posting these tournament games after everything's over, and maybe a couple of other videos. But yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm Lao pretty much anywhere that I participate with something. I do co-own a game production company. If anyone's interested, we're just getting off the ground. We've funded our first game called Worn Wanderers, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you can come check us out, or ping me, and I can give you more information. But
Really cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Also, I definitely want to just plug the LorcanaHQ Twitch. We are and moving forward, we are going to be trying our best to stream all of our commentary and kind of games onto that LorcanaHQ Twitch site. And plus, it's a great way to replay some of the stuff there. So definitely go check that out as well.
Yeah, check out the Discord, check out the Twitch. Hopefully these streams get better and better as we continue to practice. Like mentioned earlier, we have the round 5 and then the finals coming up, which we'll hopefully be able to stream there. You guys can follow me at Bsquared24. I have a YouTube channel. I also can be found at Bsquared24YT on Twitter. And Jay, I know you have a Twitter. I don't know how much you use it.
Yep, you can find me at Jeilanin on Twitter. Try to just post updates. I don't use it too much. I try to keep my social media a little bit limited, but I try to post any updates, especially for my YouTube content on there. And you can check out some of the YouTube content, especially if you're interested in learning about some deck archetypes and seeing how it generally runs. It's on YouTube under my name, Jaegu, or just search up like Lorcana, and you'll probably find some of my videos there. So yeah, appreciate y'all.
All right, guys, we're gonna sign off. Everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Done.